Yeah, I guess that's sad. I liked what you're saying about it being parables of does Nick learn from Gatsby. We don't follow Nick afterward. It says that he eventually moved back to the Midwest because he was done with New York. But I don't think there's any indication in the book that either Gatsby's death affected him that much or that anything really inspired him to change who he is or how he lived. And so that was kind of the surprising thing to me was to think back and think, no, Nick doesn't change. He's just as bad as everybody else. And I think that kind of goes back to the point of not liking characters. And you're not supposed to, and you're supposed to see yourself in them and not like that. I think the biggest reason for not liking these characters is how careless they are and how passive they are. But I think that's intentional. I think the book is written in a way that almost makes you one of the characters. Through the whole thing, you're mad at Nick because he's just like watching these things happen and not doing anything. But at the same time, you're doing the exact same thing as a reader. You are just as much present as he is. And, I mean, you could physically put down a book at any time, but you don't. And so, even though bad things are happening, you continue to allow them to happen, basically. Just as Nick continues to allow them to happen.
Yeah, when Nick talks about being both, what is it, within and without,
Right.
and he's there basically mostly just as a passive kind of watcher of everything. That is very much the reader and telling the reader, you are Nick. Nick is your surrogate in this story. You're in and out, and that you're only just passively watching all of this.
Right. And I think that's kind of the part that's supposed to bum you out. And the part that, like, when you finish, you should be sad about the environment of things that we live in, that the book takes place in, and you should feel almost kind of bad about yourself. Not just because you realize that you're passive like Nick or that you're obsessed with something like Gatsby, but because almost just how ineffectual you are, like, as a person. Like, these bad things are happening and continue to happen, and you're not going to stop them. Just like Nick's not going to stop them. And when you're done with this book, you're not going to think, oh, how can I make my world a better place? You're going to move on to the next book.
That is a good point. That is very cheery as well.
Yeah, like I said, this is an extremely sad book. And I feel like it's sad because a lot of people miss it in their first, like, reading in high school. Any readings you have to do for class, you're not going to really enjoy them too much. But I feel like you could tell or kind of introduce this book and set the scene in such a way that it can become more interesting if you tell them, like, this is going to be a sad book. Like, there's not much
But you'll
hope.
enjoy it, yeah. Hopefully.
I mean, I guess that's a good question, too. Did you enjoy the book?
I did. I think the thing I enjoyed the most about it was the prose.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed thinking about it. We're talking about a book that's actually, like, pretty uneventful, right? It's a lot of rich people getting together, drinking and having boring conversations at parties.
Right.
And other than the deaths in the book, there aren't many parts that are too dramatic, right? So I think Fitzgerald does a really good job of making up for that with just good prose.
Yeah, I don't think you could have bad. I mean, it would not be the same book if someone else had written it. I think it's interesting too that you talk about the only things that happen in it are people going to parties, going to different places, drinking, and having boring conversations. It, in that way, seems oddly poignant for high schoolers because for some reason we all want to go to places and go to these parties and drink. And then when you look back on them like 10 years later, you're thinking, why did I want to go to those high school parties?
We wanted to do it because we weren't supposed to want to do it because we weren't allowed to drink yet.
I guess so.
The same way that people started drinking more after Prohibition.
I guess so, yeah. It's a weird parallel between, like... Because I think when you read it in high school, you think, like, yeah, these are cool things. Who wouldn't want to be these people? Like, they have these huge houses, they have these cool cars, all they do is hang out and drink, they, like, have these great parties, people dance. It seems awesome, what's the problem? But I guess when you need to read books more than once.
Right.
We should have books like that, too. I feel like one of the more poignant ones for that is anything by Salinger. Because you have to read those in high school, and you might, like, strongly relate to characters. And
We'll definitely do Catcher in the Rye at some point.
That's a good one for that.
Do you have any more notes on this one? Because I think I've gone through mine. I do want to add that Crash Course, their literature segment, John Green did a 2-part video on The Great Gatsby. That's really worth a watch. Not that Crash Course needs help from us, because John and Hank Green have like a bunch of subscribers and viewers, and the production value on those videos is really good, though. They had a pretty good sizable budget for that and employees and stuff. So those are really interesting. He mentioned something where he talks about like these books are full of symbolism, and you can go symbol hunting in these books.
Right.
There's plenty of places to do that. So there's some synesthesia as well, like flowers smell of gold, voices sound like they're full of money.
Right.
And then for the symbolism, the big one is like colors, and the colors are green, yellow, and pale gold.
Right.
And these are like symbols of money, symbols of wealth, symbols of things that you're supposed to want and desire. The green light at the end of the bay.
Right.
The gold car that Gatsby drives, or yellow car that Gatsby drives. But then they also become the symbol of death and decay.
I guess so. I noticed that too when I was reading. I started taking notes on things about color, like yellow lines of windows and the moon, a triangle of silver scales as it reflects into things. There is a lot of color. The car was described as a rich cream color with green leather. Gatsby wore a caramel suit. I don't know that there's too much to be read into these things, but I mean, I guess the big one is the gold. I don't know that the green light needs to like symbolize anything necessarily, besides that I guess you could say it's in some weird way that green and light is what we associate as go.
Well, Nick Carraway literally talks about how he remembers seeing Gatsby looking out at the bay at the green light.
Right.
And he realizes what Gatsby, like why he would do that. And he talks about how he wonders at a certain point if Gatsby even realizes that there's no point in like that once he starts seeing Daisy, that the green light doesn't even mean the same thing to him anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
You can go symbol hunting in this. I don't know how much you want to. That's up to the reader.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it depends on like what you want to get out of the book. If you just want to get the plot or the prose. But yeah, I guess that's the good thing about books, though, is you can just like sit and pretty much pick them apart over the course of a month and find weird little things. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm pretty much finished up with my notes.
Okay.
The only thing, yeah, if you haven't been convinced to read this book, there are just incredible prose throughout that should make you want to read it.
Yeah, my prose, as the takeaway, my final notes would be the prose were the most enjoyable part for me to read, and then coming up, it's very thought-provoking, so then coming up with like things to talk about with you for the podcast.
Right.
Too.
I mean, I think that like the impressive thing is like the way that Fitzgerald can like set scenes and like the way that he describes things. And then I feel like he also has another way that he almost just says really simple things in profound ways. And one of my favorites that I guess we can like wrap up on is that after Nick calls Jordan and basically tells her he's breaking up with her, and she already says that she's engaged to someone else, and calls him a bad driver. She says that she thought Nick was honest and straightforward. Nick's response was that he's 5 years too old to lie to himself and call it honor. And I feel like that one really stuck out to me as like the idea that you could that's kind of what people do, is just
Lie to themselves and call it honor.
Yeah, like I said, there's probably 1,000 quotes in this that kind of hit and make you feel uncomfortable, or at least made me feel uncomfortable as I read this, because just whether it's from Gatsby or Nick or Tom, I could like see just tiny parts of me in each of them and recognize like I've probably had that thought before. Like I've probably lied to myself like that. And so read it for the prose and stick around for feeling bad about the world.
Yeah. I think we did a good job. 10 out of 10 pale yellow clown wagons.
10 out of 10?
Yeah.
I like it. I'm good.